The Ultimate Warrior wasn't just a wrestler, he was a human energy drink on legs. A man who ran to the ring like the ropes owed him money and shouted promos like someone had poured pre-workout directly into his brainstem. Whether you adored his larger-than-life character or rolled your eyes at his philosophy, somewhere between Nietzsche and a malfunctioning blender, you can't deny the Warrior left an unforgettable mark on pro wrestling. But behind the face paint and frenzied entrances, Warrior had a reputation. Not just for being intense or unconventional, but for being downright difficult. Warrior was a man who didn't so much burn bridges as body splash them into oblivion. Still, even the most polarizing figures have their allies, and Warrior had more than a few opponents he actually respected. So, in true sports entertainment fashion, let's count down the 5 wrestlers the Ultimate Warrior absolutely hated working with, and 5 he actually enjoyed stepping into the squared circle with. Think of this as part documentary, part roast, and part group therapy session for anyone Warrior stiffed between 1987 and 1992. Imagine trying to wrestle an oak tree. Now imagine doing it while wearing tassels and screaming about the gods above. That was basically Warrior versus Andre. By the late 80s, Andre's body was breaking down. He moved slower than an A glacier with arthritis. Meanwhile, Warrior was a one-man stampede. Warrior's offense was fast, frantic, and, let's be honest, careless. Andre, who had spent decades protecting the business and his opponents, was not amused. Reports from the road paint a grim picture. Andre reportedly hated working with Warrior. He'd swat him like a fly mid-match, often yelling, "Slow down," or "Stupid," mid-ring. In one famous incident, Warrior reportedly hit Andre with a clothesline so stiff it nearly took the big man off his feet, and Andre responded with a swift punch that nearly took Warrior off the payroll. Yet, to his credit, Warrior never retaliated. Maybe out of respect, maybe because Andre was the size of a house, but either way, the chemistry was bad. Andre felt Warrior didn't respect the fundamentals of wrestling, and Warrior, well, probably didn't understand the fundamentals of wrestling. Here's the twist. Rick Rude and Warrior had great matches. WrestleMania 5 and SummerSlam 89 were highlights of both men's careers, but behind the scenes, these two got along about as well as oil and more oil that refuses to mix. Rude was a technician, fluid, smooth, safe. Warrior? Let's just say if wrestling was driving, Warrior never passed his parallel parking test. Rude was reportedly furious at how Warrior handled himself in the ring, calling him unsafe and reckless. Their personal dislike came to a head during a backstage scuffle when Rude supposedly told Warrior to stop potatoing him, and Warrior responded with either indifference or intensity, depending on who's telling the story. Rude took pride in his craft. Warrior took pride in shaking the ropes. It was never going to work. This one's less about working and more about not working well together at all. Warrior and Hogan had their legendary match at WrestleMania 6, and it was surprisingly solid. But the real conflict came later, mainly backstage. These were two massive egos trying to share one very tiny spotlight. Hogan reportedly felt Warrior didn't understand the business. Warrior, in turn, thought Hogan was jealous and manipulative. In one shoot promo years later, Warrior accused Hogan of political games, burying talent, and generally being a snake in yellow tights. Hogan fired back with that passive-aggressive charm of his, implying Warrior lacked respect, charisma, and actual wrestling ability. Their attempt to rekindle magic in WCW was an unmitigated disaster. Their match at Halloween Havoc 98 is still shown to aspiring wrestlers as a warning. It was like watching two egos wrestle in a fog machine. Warrior was slated for a major program with Jake in 1991. The build-up? Promos, where Warrior entered dungeons, got bitten by snakes, and said things like, "Only the Warriors can survive this test." It was Warrior at his weirdest, and Jake at his most sinister. But here's the kicker. Jake was promised a title run if he helped get Warrior over. After all the build-up, Warrior supposedly went to Vince and nixed the feud, burying the whole angle before it climaxed. Jake never got his revenge, and he never got that title run either. Jake has since stated that he was furious, rightfully so. He called Warrior selfish and difficult. Warrior, for his part, didn't address Jake directly much in public, but given how quick he was to cut ties and promos, his silence spoke volumes. Technically, Warrior didn't work against Heenan in the traditional sense, but he made headlines for something that had everyone in the business seeing red. In a shoot promo, Warrior called out Heenan in extremely disrespectful terms, even though Heenan was battling cancer at the time. The backlash was instant. Wrestlers from across the industry condemned Warrior. Heenan himself, ever the professional, responded with grace, but his son later admitted that Warrior's comments were hurtful. Whether it was misplaced anger, Warrior being Warrior, or just a lack of tact, this was a moment that cemented Warrior's rep as someone who struggled with empathy, or at least public relations. Now here's a pairing that worked. Warrior and Savage had undeniable chemistry. Their WrestleMania 7 match, the infamous career-ending match, was one of the best of Warrior's career. Why? Because Savage got it. He knew Warrior wasn't going to chain wrestle or work a 5-star classic. So Savage laid everything out meticulously. Every move, every moment, every near fall, planned to the second. Warrior followed the plan, and the result was magic. Off-screen, the two had mutual respect. Savage appreciated Warrior's intensity, and Warrior respected Savage's dedication to storytelling. They may not have been best friends, but they weren't enemies, and that made all the difference. If you wanted someone to make Warrior look like the second coming of Hercules, you called Curt Hennig. Bumps, cells, flying through the ropes like he'd been shot out of a cannon. Hennig did it all. Warrior loved working with Hennig because it was easy. Hennig didn't complain, didn't politic, and didn't try to steal the spotlight. He made Warrior look incredible and never once demanded more than he gave. Theirs wasn't a deep friendship, but Warrior knew a good dance partner when he saw one. And Curt Hennig made everyone look better, especially Warrior. Warrior and Kerry were kindred spirits, muscular, intense, and both with a look that screamed main event. They had similar paths, short, explosive WWF runs that burned hot and ended abruptly. More importantly, they were reportedly close outside the ring. Warrior respected Kerry's heart. Literally, he wrestled with a prosthetic foot, and Kerry admired Warrior's energy. They didn't feud much, but when they did team or work together, there was a bond there. Warrior saw Kerry as a brother in arms, a fellow outsider in a business full of insiders. Paint, muscles, intensity, more paint. If you threw Warrior, Hawk, and Animal into a blender, you'd get a protein shake that screamed its own promos. LOD and Warrior were never a faction, but they often worked in similar storylines, taking on stables, squashing jobbers, and selling action figures like hotcakes. Warrior respected how Hawk and Animal conducted business. No backstage drama, no politics, just pure destruction. Plus, when you've got three guys who look like boss fights in a video game, there's an unspoken bond. Now, on the surface, Warrior and Honky Tonk Man couldn't have been more different. One was a wild man from parts unknown. The other was an Elvis impersonator who wrestled like he was trying to stall for time at a karaoke night. But here's the twist. Warrior loved how Honky done business. At SummerSlam 1988, Warrior burst onto the Intercontinental title scene by absolutely demolishing Honky Tonk in just 31 seconds. That squash match became legendary, and Honky agreed to it. He knew his run as Intercontinental champ had peaked, and he wanted to do something memorable on the way out. Honky has since said in interviews that Warrior was green, but cooperative, and more importantly, grateful. Warrior, for his part, appreciated that Honky was willing to put him over clean and quick, without ego, without politicking, and without trying to stretch out the spotlight. It was a passing of the torch moment disguised as a hit and run, and Warrior never forgot it, and neither have we. The Ultimate Warrior was many things. Unpredictable, controversial, charismatic, frustrating, and unforgettable. He was a storm in boots, a superhero with a short fuse. To some, he was a legend. To others, a cautionary tale in body oil and neon. But love him or hate him, he made people feel something. And that's the magic of pro wrestling. His list of enemies was long, but not endless. Some guys clashed with him harder than a clothesline to the throat. Others brought out the best in him. And a rare few, they actually got the Warrior to calm down long enough to make magic. In the end, Warrior wasn't here to make friends, he was here to make an impact. And whether that impact came with a clothesline, a body splash, or a shoot promo that made everyone cringe, he made sure the world remembered his name. Even if half of them remembered it while applying ice packs. Thanks for watching.